James Ernest, Gruel and Truth Radio Network, here with author Randy Roberts. Tell us a little bit about your new book about Mickey Mantle, A Season in the Sun.
Well, my co-author and I, Johnny Smith, the one thing we noticed about Mickey Mantle is that perhaps more than any other player, his life was defined by its ending more than anything else. It's as if we all know how Mickey Mantle ended. He was an alcoholic. He was a bad father. He had the liver problems. His death was sad, and he was so much different than what he was. And so other people have kind of looked at, okay, how did Mickey reach the end? What were the way stations? And so, his life becomes kind of a way station towards alcoholism and death. But we wanted to look at Mickey Mantle before the story of his end was known, when all there was in front of him was promise. And so we wanted to return Mickey to his golden era, which was the 1950s. And we particularly wanted to focus in on the rise of Mickey Mantle, how he became an icon, how he became a celebrity, and achieving it all in 1956 with his great Triple Crown year.
Is he the greatest baseball player ever?
No, I don't think he's the greatest baseball player ever. I don't think he was. He was not the hitter that Ted Williams was. He was not the overall player that Joe DiMaggio was. Mickey was not a cerebral player. When he got in a slump, he was likely to stay in the slump for a while because all he did was hit the ball. He didn't think about how he hit the ball. Ted Williams would get in a slump, and he knew what he had to do to get out of the slump. Mickey was kind of mystified by it all. But Mickey was, he was such a telegenic athlete. He was almost made for television. If there was a player that was made for television, made for the 1950s in a new era of celebrity, it was Mickey Mantle. I mean, I don't think there was a better looking baseball player than Mickey Mantle. I mean, he may not have been the greatest baseball player that ever lived, but he looked like he should have been the greatest baseball player who ever lived. I mean, he had, just country strong muscles, good looking face, aw shucks smile. I mean, he had it all.
How about the greatest switch hitter?
Oh, I don't think there's any question he's the greatest switch hitter. He invented the idea of a power-hitting switch hitter. Before Mickey Mantle, there had never been a switch hitter that had hit over 150 home runs. I mean, a switch hitter was a guy that just kind of nibbled at the ball and bounced it out a little bit and had tremendous speed and was able to make it to first base. Mickey Mantle was groomed to be a power-hitting first base. I mean, a power-hitting switch hitter. His father did this. And I've often thought about it. What act of imagination thought that a switch hitter could for extraordinary power from both sides of the plate when it had never happened before? I mean, it was almost like the creation of a Frankenstein.
What was life like growing up for him in Oklahoma?
Tough. If you visit Commerce, Oklahoma, it was a tough place to grow up. It was an area, that part of Oklahoma is lead and zinc mining. And it was as difficult as you could get. It was bleak. Where his wife is from is Pitcher, Oklahoma, which is only a few miles from Commerce. And it's now a disaster area. Nobody lives there. Everybody had to move out because of the problems. I talked to some people there, and I said, what was it like? What was it like? And, one person put it, I think, really eloquently. He said, well, have you ever shoveled a good wet snow? And I said, yeah, we all have. And he says, that's about 20, 25 pounds per shovel of snow that you lift up. And you know how you feel after a half hour. Well, if you're working in a lead mine and working on a face, you're shoveling, it's 60 to 80, 85 pounds even, and you're doing that 8 or 10 hours a day. You can imagine what that does to you. Your lungs are sucking in all that dust. Very few of those miners lived to be very long, very old. I mean, they had one disease or another they would get from working in the mines. So it was not a good life. Mickey saw his uncles and his father die. His father died at 39. His uncles died even earlier, or right around the same age. He saw other people from his community dying. He just assumed that that's the way it went. That he would be dead by the age of 40. He was surprised that he lived as long as he did. But you can still go to Commerce today. You can't go down to Vermont. You can get a feel for it.
I know what you mean. I thought that was an interesting quote of his, that if I knew I was going to live longer, I would have taken better care of myself.
Yeah, that's a quote that other people have. It wasn't new to Mickey, but other people had said the same thing. I think was it Burns? I'm trying to think of Burns' first name, but anyway, he had said that. George Burns, had said it. And, Groucho Marx might have said it. Who knows what the origins come from? But there is a truth to it.
So was it an intentional thing with his father and grandfather pitching him from different sides, or was it just happened?
It was intentional. His father was a great student of baseball and liked switch hitters, and thought that, well, if he can bat from both sides of the plate, he'll be equally adept at hitting right-handed or left-handed pitching, and it should give him a leg up. His father, I think his father was not a talker, just like Mickey. They were both pretty silent people. I mean, there was a great love between the two, but they never said it. They just didn't articulate things. But the father clearly wanted something better for Mickey than what he had. His father loved baseball, and his father would take Mickey every once in a while up to the Cardinal games in St. Louis, which wasn't that far away. And so, there was a sense that if he could train Mickey's eye, if he could train his muscle reflexes from both sides, that he would have a chance to get out of the mines. That he would have a chance to earn his living above the ground and not in the ground, as miners say. They didn't say under the ground; they said in the ground.
How many times did his father save him from quitting from baseball?
Well, the famous case of the father and his baseball career is Mickey comes up in 51 to the Yankees, and he has just a spectacular spring training. I mean, he's hitting the ball in orbit, and the manager, Casey Stengel, was singing his praises. All the reporters were singing his praises. He was going to be the next great Yankee. And if you look at and he was given the number for the next great Yankee. Babe Ruth was 3, Lou Gehrig was 4, Joe DiMaggio was 5, and initially Mickey Mantle was number 6. But he fell into a slump. Yeah, he wasn't terrible, but the Yankees felt that, well, it's just not working out. He needs more seasoning, and so he was sent back to the minors. He was sent to Kansas City. To work on his swing, to get his hitting back to where it was. And he goes into Kansas City, and he calls his father at one point, and he says, Dad, I just can't do it. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm not a major league player. I just can't hit the ball. He's trapped in a slump, and he doesn't know what to do about it. And so his father drives immediately up to Kansas City and, goes into his hotel room and says, let's get packing. He starts packing Mickey Mantle. And Mickey, well, what? He said, well, I never thought I'd raise my son to be a coward. Now Mickey's saying, man, I was looking for sympathy. I'm not really looking to get out of the game. And, that's the famous story of the father kind of saving Mickey, come to Jesus meeting.
I recently read another great baseball book by Galen White, Singles and Smiles, and it talks about how Mickey Mantle was almost teammates with Willie Mays, because if Willie Mays would have went to Oakland in the Pacific League, he would have probably been in the Yankee system, because how Oakland and the Yankee connection, Stengel and all that. What's your thoughts on if he would have been in the outfield with Willie Mays?
Well, you would have had two center fielders in the outfield. That Mickey, when he first came up, could play right field, and either one of them could have played any place else. It's an interesting concept to think about. Although the Yankees were very, very slow in integrating its team. It was only, I think, the year before that they got Elston Howard up and integrated the team. And they were looking for a very particular type of African American athlete. They thought they needed to have to appeal to the team and to appeal to their fans. I'm not sure that the Yankee organization would have taken Willie Mays. I'm not sure if they would have thought Willie Mays was the ideal Yankee. That he and it's hard to say. As great as Willie Mays was, look how long it took the Yankees. It took even longer for Boston to integrate. It's not because the ownership didn't know there were great African American athletes out there. They just were hesitant. There was a streak of racism in both programs.
In '56, I mean, the Triple Crown, the MVP, the All-Star Games, the World Series, the Hicko Belt Award. Has anyone had a better single season in baseball?
I don't really think. I mean, Mickey in '56, not only did he lead the American League in hits and runs batted in, home runs and batting average and runs batted in, but he led both leagues. I mean, his 52 home runs, a 353 batting average, 130 RBIs. I mean, that's spectacular. And look who he beat out. I mean, he had a tremendous batting average race with Ted Williams. I mean, he went mano a mano in the last half of the year with Ted Williams for that title. And then he has to fight Al Kaline, who was a brilliant player, too, for the RBI titles. As a matter of fact, Al Kaline, the race for RBIs went to the very last day, and Mickey's team finished earlier. And so they had to wait in the locker room to see what Al Kaline did, see how, if he broke it, because it turned out, I think it was 130 to 128 for Kaline, and they knew that Kaline had picked up one, and or a couple, and he was going to have one or at least two more times back. And so Mickey had to wait to find out that he won the Triple Crown. And it's a good story is that years later at a card show, Kaline was signing his name. Somebody said to him, "You're not half the player Mickey Mantle was." And Al Kaline looked at him and said, "Son, nobody was half the player Mickey Mantle was."
Wow. How did Mickey go from, with him being so quiet, how did he go from an outsider to Mr. New York in '61?
Well, when you're the center fielder for the Yankees, when you're the best baseball player in New York, well, of course New York had some great baseball players, but when you're a celebrity of that stature in New York, suddenly New York conforms to you. I mean, you don't have to say anything, you don't have to do anything. You are just the man, and you get the best table at if you go to Toots Shores, and Toots is your best friend suddenly, and every other saloon keeper in New York knows you, and there's a whole world that opens up to you, and you don't have to do anything to open it. It is just the doors are wide open, and Mickey took advantage of it. Maybe took too much advantage. I mean, he drank too much, he caroused too much. In the newspapers, he's a paragon of virtue. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he's a family man, he's devoted to his wife and his children. Of course, that was one side of that was the image of Mickey Mantle. The reality was something quite different.
Did the injuries in some weird way help him for the fact that he didn't have to go into the service?
I don't think so, to tell you the truth. The whole service issue, and those are knees. I mean, his injuries from his childhood injuries, but the service. I think hurt him. I mean, if he had gone into the service, what would he have been in? He would have been in maybe a year and a half. He probably would have missed the season. But players at that time, a lot of them missed seasons. I mean, Ted Williams went into World War II and the Korean War years. Joe DiMaggio missed years, and so I don't think it would have hurt him. It may have even made him even a bigger hero. It's hard to say. That's a hard. Emotionally, it bothered Mickey, particularly early in his career, when he was viewed as kind of a draft dodger. He wasn't. He was legitimately had bad legs, but that's one of those imponderables. I never really gave a whole lot of thought how much it would have hurt him.
Did he hit the longest home runs ever, or one of the longest home runs as a hitter? I mean, consistently with his power.
No question about it. I mean, he's the guy that would, first game he had about 1,000 feet of home run, 56 in his first game of the season when they played down in D.C. in old Griffith Field, and he pounded the ball out of there. He hit one out of Briggs. He invented the concept of the tape measure home run, or at least the concept was invented for him. Where suddenly the Yankees publicity department were starting to measure how far his balls went. I mean, he just unloaded on the ball, and the sound that the ball made, the quickness off the bat. I remember seeing on TV, but Reggie Jackson hit a ball in an All-Star game. I think it was an All-Star game in Detroit. It would have been an All-Star game, and it seemed to me the hardest ball I've ever seen hit. And sometimes you'll see a ball that's hit, and it just seems to fly. I mean, it's not like it arcs over this fence. It seems to just drive over the fence and out of the ballpark, and that's the kind of balls he consistently hit. People, when Mickey Mantle went into the batting cage to take batting practice, everything stopped. Opposing players watched. His own teammates watched. They never knew what Mickey would do, even when he was in the batting cage. There was just something different about the way he hit a baseball.
And to the other extreme, the way I understand it, he was one of the best bunters as well.
Well, he had particularly before he really racked up his knees. Well, he racked up his first season, but he was still fast. He was considered the fastest player in baseball, and so he could bunt the ball. He could get to first base so darn fast, and since he could go from both sides of the plate, left-handed, it made him even faster. He was a great bunter, but he didn't really like to bunt. He liked to hit the long ball. He liked to swing. He liked to put everything he could into every cut.
The way I understand it, he had a really good relationship with Billy Martin. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
They were best friends, that's for sure. I don't think they were very good for each other, but they were best friends. And when they were together, if they weren't on the field, they were liable to get into trouble. They both had kind of a sophomoric sense of humor. They got a kick out of the same sort of kind of jokes. They both loved. Billy was a natural leader. Mickey, off the field, was a natural follower, and he got a kick out. Mickey was silent; he didn't talk a lot, but he got a kick out of Billy. Billy talked all the time, and it was sort of a relationship. I won't say it's a relationship made in heaven because it wasn't good for either one of them, and it certainly wasn't good for either one of their marriages. But they liked each other, and then teamed up with Whitey Ford, of course. Whitey was the guy that would instigate things and just never get caught.
Sounds like an interesting trio there.
It was an interesting trio until it was broken up in '57 after the Copa incident, and Billy was traded off.
So it sounds like alcohol, gambling, all that, ended up hurting his career and just kind of limiting it in some ways.
I don't think there's any question that his drinking didn't help his career. I mean, there's stories of him going out the night before, thinking that he wasn't going to play the next day, and then suddenly he'd be called up, and Stengel would put him in the game, and he'd still be groggy from the night before, and he'd hit a home run, and people would say, "How did he do that?" He said, "Well, hitting the ball was easy. It was running around those bases. It was hard." I mean, some of those stories undoubtedly are apocryphal, but he burned the midnight oil. I mean, he was a regular at Toots Shores. He was a favorite at Toots Shores, and Toots Shores was the mecca for athletes in New York and if you wanted to see an athlete in the 1950s. And so, yeah, it didn't help. And of course, this was the age of the infamous greenies, the amphetamines that were there for all the players to consume before they went out in the field. It was believed that you needed a little pick me up. This is what gave it to you. It was the preferred performance enhancement drug of the 1950s.
Who would you like to thank for their help with the book? Obviously, your co-author, but what other people impacted this book?
Oh boy, so many people. There are people that we interviewed down in Commerce, people we interviewed, players that we talked to overall. One of the places that we go and do a lot of research is the Library of Congress, and the staffs at the Library of Congress in their microfilm room. I mean, there were 8 major newspapers in New York in the 1950s, and we went through those papers, and you have to be able to go to a place to see them. And the Library of Congress has always been a great research source for Johnny and I. And so there's just so many people. I hate to mention them individually because then I'd be forgetting somebody.
Well, we greatly appreciate you coming on the show today, Randy, and discussing Mickey Mantle with us. Tell us, before you go, if fans are wanting to follow some more of your work on social media, on the web, where should they check you out at?
Well, my books are, you could certainly, on Amazon, you can get the books. I mean, I've written books. I kind of deal with iconic figures. So I've written books on Joe Louis and Jack Dempsey, Muhammad Ali, and Oscar Robertson, Bear Bryant, and Joe Namath, John Wayne, and other figures. I'm still kind of old school. I don't really have I should have a website, and I don't really have a website. I keep telling myself I'm going to do that, but the best way to see what I've done is really the books I've written.
Sounds great. And like you said, you can get this book pretty much anywhere? Amazon and all the major bookstores?
Yeah, Barnes & Nobles, your local bookstores, Amazon, the books. You can get the book pretty much everywhere still.
Before we let you go, what's his Mickey Mantle's legacy? What's his impact on today's game?
Well, certainly the idea of the long ball. Babe Ruth hit the long ball, of course, Lou Gehrig. But then when you had a Joe DiMaggio, DiMaggio wasn't dependent upon the home run. There were other, it was the overall game. It was a skill. But Mickey brings the long ball back. And, today baseball is obsessed still with the long ball, with the long hitter. The long ball probably saved baseball in the late 1990s after all the strikes, and then suddenly had the Sosa and McGuire and Bonds just hitting the long ball. So, that was a legacy of Mickey Mantle. That if you wanted to be considered the icon of the sport, if you wanted to get paid the most, hit home runs.
Like you said, I mean, that's still the way nowadays. I mean, where the home run hitters are definitely rewarded and elevated. So you're right, things don't change.
Nope.
I appreciate you being on the show today, Randy, and definitely we'd love to have you back again in the future.
Anytime. Love to do it.
Sounds great.